Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to LinkedIn Live, LinkedIn Learning Office Hours. I'm Drew Boyd, and it's great to have you this morning. I see a number of people signing in and commenting here. Great to see a lot of you. We have close to 100 people signed up for this event, and that's great. These office hours are an opportunity for you to interact with the authors that you enjoy on LinkedIn Learning. And there's quite a few out there. I've got a number of courses, but I want to give a shout out to a particular author that I want to feature each week. If you haven't checked out the courses by John Ullman, please do. John is a great guy. He's a fellow Academy grad, Air Force Academy grad, but that's not why I'm featuring him. His courses on leadership and executive presence are just spot on. So be sure to check out John Ullman. Today, it's all about creativity, and especially creativity in a pandemic. What have we learned? And think back to 2 years ago. My God, it's just hard to believe it's been 2 years. But those first couple of weeks were scary, right? We were locked in and we were quarantined, and we weren't supposed to go anywhere, not supposed to go any stores or anything, and that was freaky. And during that time, I'm willing to bet a lot of you got very creative in how you approach things. And so, what I want to do is just ask you this question, and go ahead and type it into your chat function. I'm taking a close look at those. If you think about the pandemic and your own personal experience, what is the most creative or resourceful thing you've done because of the pandemic that you probably wouldn't have done otherwise? Think about that. Now, I know it's 2 years ago, but even now, in the last 2 years, what have you done that's particularly creative or resourceful that you might not have done otherwise? Go ahead and type that into the chat function here on LinkedIn, and let me see what kinds of things come up here. I'm going to call some of those out for you, and let me give you an example of something that might spark your imagination here, your memory, your recall. Take a look at this picture, and what you see here is a woman, a scantily clad woman. She is actually a professional surfboarder. She's a high-ranking, globally competitive surfing athlete, surfboarder. And I don't recall her name, but I caught this because what she's doing in her apartment is very unique. She's in California, and during the first week or two of the quarantine, people in California couldn't even go to the beach. And so what do you do if you're a professional surfboarder? You need to practice your sport. And what this young lady did was remarkable. She took an ironing board, strung it in a hammock in her apartment so that she could practice her moves and her footwork even inside her apartment. Now, that is pretty resourceful. An ironing board strung inside of a hammock. And wow, I thought that was pretty cool, pretty interesting. And so, what have you done that was creative or resourceful? Can you think of anything that stirs your imagination or catches your attention? Go ahead and type it, and I'll keep tracking in these. And that's really what I want to talk here about in this office hours segment. Now, you may be having a little trouble thinking about that question. What have I done that's really creative, or what have I done that's really resourceful? And it may be because maybe you're not sure what creativity is to begin with. What would really qualify as a creative act? And that's what I want to get into with you this morning, is talk about what creativity is and how it's played out in the pandemic, and what can we learn from it. So the definition that I subscribe to is this: creativity is when two previously unrelated themes suddenly collide and suddenly come together. And there's a great definition of this from this book you see here. It's by a guy named Arthur Kessler. It's called The Act of Creation. Unfortunately, this book is out of print, but if you can get a copy, it's absolutely brilliant. Arthur Kessler. Now, what I want to do is show you some examples. What would be this sudden collision of two previously unrelated themes? So take a look at this. On the one picture, you have what appears to be an ice cream cone, but it's in the shape of a microphone. And so microphone, ice cream cone collided to create this interesting image. Or you see a product here. I remember seeing this product over in France when I was visiting the Bordeaux region. It's a mustache pacifier, right? The baby puts the pacifier in and they look like grandpa with a mustache. Well, it's pretty cute. And is it creative? Yeah, absolutely, it's creative. But just because something is unique does not necessarily make it useful. Not to say that those were bad ideas at all. They were actually pretty creative. But you could be very creative and not the least bit useful. So when you think about what you've done during the pandemic and the things that you've had to contend with and deal with or work around, or do differently than what you've done in the past, it's most likely a creative output. And you should look back and reflect on those, because that's how you're going to learn what creativity really is and how you repeat it over and over. That's really what the good message about creativity is that it's a skill. It's not a gift. It's not something you're born with. Right? You can learn to be creative like you can learn any other skill, whether it be in business or a new sport or a new game or something like that. And that's what a lot of my work here on LinkedIn Learning is about, as well as my podcast and some other things. So let's now look at this issue about creativity. And there's really two types of creativity I want to draw to your attention. The first type we would call MacGyver type creativity. You know, MacGyver, if you remember the TV show, there was an original version of the show and then a remake later on. And this guy, MacGyver, was I think a private investigator, a former Navy SEAL. He was sort of a magical guy, because he would get himself in trouble and then get himself out of trouble in very creative ways. He would, what would MacGyver do, right? He would think of the most unique and creative ways to deal with these terrible situations. So the picture you see, for example, of the 2 feet, that's an actual image from one of his shows, where he took duct tape and was stuck in a jungle or in a forest somewhere, and he used the duct tape to wrap his feet and protect them. Very creative, no doubt about it. Now, it's that type of creativity that I call more resourceful. MacGyver type creativity is what I call that. And here's some other examples that I found online. The top image there you see, that's an image of some military guys that need to make morning breakfast. And what did they do? They took their shovels and cleaned them up, I hope, cleaned them up real good. And then they created to create a cooking surface to put over the heat and fry their morning eggs. Yeah, a very good example of MacGyver creativity. And what tends to be noteworthy about MacGyver type ideas is that they tend to harness something in the immediate vicinity, right nearby you, like our surfboarder, right? She had an ironing board to create a surfboard and a sling or a hammock to sling in an apartment. And that's what I would call MacGyver type creativity. She was using the things right around her to create solutions. And likewise, in the picture you see there in the bottom, you see a caterpillar lifting a caterpillar that's lifting something else. Pretty creative. Not sure I'd recommend it to anybody, but it certainly is an example of the type of creativity that I'm referring to here, so-called MacGyver creativity. Now, the other type of creativity you have to understand is what I would call new to the world creativity. not necessarily about resourcefulness. It's true about genuine, true creativity, but useful creativity. Something like you see here, this two-wheeled bicycle that is great for kids because it allows them to uh, learn how to ride a bike. But what this clever little device does is that as the kid gets better and more proficient at riding the bicycle, and as their speed increases, these wheels, what they do is they narrow and they get tighter and tighter, ultimately to form one wheel when the child achieves the balance they need to ride their bicycle. Very creative. An example of a particular type of creativity, a technique of creativity I would call attribute dependency. As one thing changes, another thing is changing. And in this case, as the speed of the bicycle increases, the gap between the wheels reduces. And it has the obvious benefit of helping the child learn how to ride the bike most effectively. Love that idea. Great example of what we would call new to the world creativity. So I'm going to pause here and just take a look over in the comment section, make sure I don't see anything there. Now, if you have a question or two, go ahead and put the letter Q in front of it, Q colon, write your question, and that way we know to go ahead and pull out your particular thing here. I'm looking for my stylus. It decided to disappear on me right as I went live here. God, oh well. Okay, not got to worry about it. So place your questions in the comments. We'll be sure to answer them. This is your chance with office hours to engage your authors and make this a useful intervention for you. So we have two types of creativity, what I call the MacGyver type, and now the new to the world creativity. And what's true is they can overlap. You may see a creative idea that you can't quite put into one bucket or the other, and that's probably because they overlap, kind of like the title of this slide here, overlapping letters. And so this is an example of an invention that allows you to change your tire if you're, say, on roads that are uneven. And the way this works is that the exhaust from the car inflates a balloon, a bladder that is so strong that it can lift the vehicle up enough for you to change that tire if the roads weren't very, very level. Now, it's MacGyverish because it's using the exhaust, right? It has that uniqueness. It's also kind of new. I really haven't seen this around. In fact, I've never seen it in the U.S. actually ever, which may tell you something about whether it's valuable or not. But what I'd like you to do to help you improve your creative mindset is do what we call pattern spotting. Start looking around the world around you and see things that you think are genuinely creative. You don't have to justify that to anybody. Just whatever, strikes you as creative, whether it's something in a store or in your home or online or maybe in your car. A lot of creative ideas in cars. And then just simply ask yourself, why? Why is this creative? What makes this? Where's that juxtaposition, that collision that makes you think, wow, that's creative? And by doing this, what happens is you start to train your eye. You start to be able to see things that are creative and know why. And then the next step there is to look at it and say, now, is that mainly resourceful, or is it it's kind of new to the world? You've never seen it before, or somewhere in the middle, this overlapping tendency. And what I find with my students and my corporate clients is that this practice of pattern spotting or creativity spotting, you look for the patterns in creative solutions, and those patterns can be replicated. That's the beauty of it, right? You see these awesome creative things and go, hey, I like that. What is the inherent pattern there, and how can I apply that to my life? Of course, this is the whole idea behind the creativity method that I talk a lot about here on LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning, the method called systematic inventive thinking. In fact, I see some of my good friends and colleagues that taught me this method many years ago, Systematic Inventive Thinking, or SIT for short. And it's based on patterns that already exist in products and services and that are replicated on demand. Pretty cool stuff. And if you're a regular listener to my podcast or join this office hours segment each week, you're going to hear more about these patterns and how to use them constructively in your day to day life. Okay, so checking for questions here. Let's see if we have anything. Good. We've got folks from Nigeria. Hi, Kanu. Good to see you. Santiago, good morning. Welcome. Andreas, a lot of good turnout today. That's great. Good to see you from India. A lot of people on the other side of the world. Normally, we get more people from Europe because of the timing, and of course, the U.S. So let's keep moving along here. And I think the question now is, what's the pandemic have to do with this idea of creativity? What are we seeing during a pandemic that is a pattern of something that we can learn? What are the lessons that it's taught us? And I've talked to many people, and I would agree in my own life, the pandemic had its frustrations, but by and large, I was able to accomplish a lot of stuff. It was highly productive during the pandemic. It taught people a lot of things about virtually connecting and many other things that they never would have done without the pandemic, as we all know. So, and I love this. What would MacGyver do if the toilet paper ran out? Ugh. Well, if you were here in the U.S., and I'm sure outside the U.S., toilet paper is running in short supply. But I want to move on to some lessons that go like this. First of all, in the pandemic, we were exposed to what I would call the principle of constraints. Constraints are a well-known factor in creativity. All researchers know that creativity is virtually impossible without at least some constraints. Constraints are not a barrier to your creative output, not at all. In fact, constraints, just the opposite. Constraints are what cause you to be creative. Constraints make your mind work harder and smarter. And so don't shy away or complain about constraints. And here's a great image. I believe this is from somewhere in Cuba. Cubans live with a lot of constraints. A good friend of mine, Amnon Lvov, lives down in Cuba. And the Cubans, have learned to become very creative, especially with a lot of MacGyver type creativity that you see here. And so it's a washing machine that's being turned by a bicycle, and in a constrained environment without necessarily electricity. You get creative. And so the lesson for you is to think about what have been the constraints on me, and then how can I harness them, right? The other lesson that I think we've all learned is that we have a cognitive bias, like it or not. It's called fixedness. Fixedness makes it very hard for us to imagine configurations other than what we know. And here on the screen, I'm showing you the experiment that was done many years ago by an Austrian psychologist named Karl Duncker. Here's how this experiment worked. Participants in the study would walk into a room, an empty room with a table, and these three items sitting on them. You have a candle, you have here a box of thumbtacks, and then you have a pack of matches. Okay, so the task was for people to do this. They had to walk in the room, and they had 15 minutes to figure out a way to attach the candle to the wall so that it could be lit. Okay, so that was the task. Now, think about it in your own mind. What would you do to attach the candle to the wall to be able to light it? If you have an answer, go ahead and pop it into the comments. I'll keep track here. Now, what most people say, having shown this example, this exercise many times, People will say things like, well, light the candle and then drip a little wax on the wall and then attach the candle with the hot wax. Or they'll say, attach some wax and then put the candle, kind of jam it horizontally into the wall. And I've had people say things like, well, let's take the pack of matches, we'll tack it to the wall, and wrap it around the candle and use the thumbtacks to tack it to the wall. And, those are all fine solutions, nothing wrong with those. But then another group of participants, randomly selected, were given the same experiment to walk into a room, see these 3 items, and then figure out how to attach the candle to the wall. But instead of what you see here, those people saw this. The same items, but now if you see here, the box of thumbtacks has been opened up. And visualized this way, people had completely different solutions. In fact, when it was this way, only 15% of people could see a different solution, where you would attach the box to the wall and place the candle inside of it, like a little shelf, and then light the candle. And so the question that Carl Dunker asked himself is why? Why aren't people able to see that solution when presented this way versus this way? And that's when he coined the phrase functional fixedness. It's our inability to see potential functions in an object that wasn't designed to do that. We have a natural inherent bias to seeing items outside of their context, seeing something performing a function it wasn't designed to do. But once we were able to break fixedness by this presentation, people naturally saw it. They said, oh, of course, just take that box. So there's this blind spot, this natural fixedness, which, by the way, we all have. It's not something you can get rid of. In fact, you wouldn't want to get rid of it. It's kind of how we organize our world around us. Nothing wrong with fixedness, unless you want to be creative. And so the pandemic, again, had an impact on us. It confronted us with having to use items outside of their context, more like MacGyver, seeing duct tape to use for wrapping your feet, or seeing other elements around you and using them in creative ways. So the principle of constraints, the principle of fixedness, became opportunities in the pandemic to formalize these, to really understand them and make ourselves more creative all the time. Here's a picture of that solution. You see how the candle is sitting inside the box. Sorry for the pun. Good. Okay, well, let's start to wrap up here a little bit. Again, checking for questions. Let's see if anything's come in here. Good. Okay, we're still good. So the pandemic, what is it teaching us? I'd summarize it this way, that first of all, you should expect to be constrained. The pandemic did that to us artificially, but now you actually want to put yourself in situations where you are constrained. Constraints of time, money, scope, boundaries of a legal or regulatory framework. Those are all helping you. And the first thing you should do is recognize those constraints and only generate ideas within those constraints. It doesn't make sense to create ideas that violate the true constraints of the system, so why ignore them? It's those constraints that form the box, inside the box, where our thinking is much more gifted at generating creative ideas than thinking outside the box, which, by the way, doesn't work. So expect to be constrained, harness the resources within. The idea of look right under your nose, right around you. They are usually within reach. Is there a way to grab that ironing board and a and a hammock and create some new way to practice your sport. And then finally, break fixedness. Recognize your fixedness. That is the barrier to being creative, and create. And looking down here from a comment from Mohammed. Mohammed, thanks for joining us. Mohammed Hamid made us go boundaryless. Yeah, brainstorming and those tend to take the boundaries off when in fact those boundaries are very important to your creative output for sure. So that's it today. What has the pandemic taught us about creativity? Look at the patterns around you in a constrained world, see your fixedness, and then use those patterns and break fixedness to be more creative. That's it. So let's see what else we have here. I wanted to finish with this quote. I love this quote. May the next few months be a period of magnificent transformation. Anonymous. That's what I wish for all of you. So let me wrap up by, again, thanking you for joining me today. Thank you, Jillian Schneider. Good to see you on LinkedIn Live here. I've known Jillian quite a while. And I want to remind you that we'll be doing these each week, each Tuesday. Now, a couple things to remind you of. First of all, don't overlook that I've also have a podcast that is also weekly, comes out every Monday, and it is all about creativity. Here on LinkedIn, I talk about a variety of topics: creativity, marketing, strategy, and many other things. But the podcast specifically is all about creativity. If you really want to learn creative methods, then it's the podcast that you want to also check. Rest of your week.